Hello everyone. In today's lecture we're going to talk a little bit about community-centered design methods. So just to frame community-centered design processes, let's have a look at Sherry Arnstein's Ladder of Citizen Participation, and she generated this in 1969. So if we think about the community-centered processes that we're using in this course, they very much focus on participative design. And participative processes can actually apply to all sorts of fields. And what this ladder does is it outlines various degrees of citizen or community participation, from low and passive at the bottom to high leadership, active leadership at the top. And so really what we're promoting as designers in this course is that we're trying to facilitate and enable citizen-controlled or community-controlled project processes in the built environment. So if we look at the bottom of the scale here and think about what this means, you'll often see projects that say, well, this is a community partnered project or a participative process, which is really about informing the community of what's going on, educating them about ways of doing things. And so this, as Arnstein terms, is passive. It's about educating or curing the powerless, those at the bottom by those at the top, or those in a position of power. If we step up a little bit to consultation, you'll often see in community projects, the community have been consulted or the community have been engaged. The community have been placated is what Sherry Arnstein says. And so this is what she frames as responsive. So we see here that those in power have the continued right to decide what the project is, what the processes are, but the powerless, so those at the bottom in the framework of this chart, the community or the citizens can advise. They can have input, but they're not really leading the project. And we see here, the powerless can hear and be heard, but they have no assurance that their inputs will actually be responded to or actioned by those in power. Now, if we look to the top of the chart here, and this is really what we're aiming for, is to have active, citizen-controlled projects, delegated power, and partnerships. And this means that there's much more increased levels of decision-making power, not just by those who are in positions of power, but power from the bottom up. Power from below, it's often described. Power to decide what projects are needed, what the brief for those projects is, who should be involved, how those projects should be monitored. Now, if we think about this course, it's actually quite difficult to have a fully citizen-led process or project in the context of academia and student learning. But we do our best to meet the community in the middle. And so we're probably sitting somewhere around here. And what we try to do is equip all of you with skills to be applied when you graduate and to advocate for when you graduate, so that you can be involved in and help to facilitate citizen-controlled projects in the built environment. So let's just stop for a moment and think about this idea of power and control and participation in your local streets. Close your eyes for a second. Think about the streets in your area, in your neighbourhood where you live. Who decides where houses go, where bus stops go, where light posts are positioned, where new benches are, where trees are planted, how wide the footpath is, where cars can park, what public events happen and when they happen, and who gets to go? Who decides all of that? Who implements all of that? Is the community involved? Are they involved a little bit? Are they involved in terms of placation? Are they involved in terms of being educated or being consulted? Or are they the ones leading these projects? Would these sorts of decisions benefit by having more or less on the ground community involved? What would happen? What would change in the process if community were involved? What would change in the outcome if community members were involved? What benefit could there be to having community involved? These are the sorts of questions we want you to think about. Take a moment now. So let's bring this back to the course. In this course, we're exploring street life or lived streets. And what does that mean when we think about community-centered processes or participative processes? It means that we value lived experience and knowledge from those on the ground. It means that we try to enable agency to those voices, to bring those voices up that ladder so that they're able to lead projects like this. What does this mean when we think about the role of the built environment designer? So the role of the landscape architect or the role of the architect or the role of the interior architect. It means we actually need to change the way that we perceive our disciplines and our roles in projects like this. So we're not here to save, to fix things, to solve a problem whose brief is given to us, parachuting in at the end of the project when many of the decisions have been made. We believe, and there's much research and practice work kind of pushing this forward, that built environment designers can be facilitators and connectors. They can help to bring ideas together. They can help to enable agency to those voices on the ground. What can we bring? We can bring disciplinary expertise to meet community knowledge in the middle. So we're both bringing valuable expertise and knowledge, and we have to synthesize that from the beginning of the project, not just at the very end when designers often come in. And so that's what this course is all about, trying to teach those ways of thinking and those types of processes in the context of the built environment. And what we're trying to do is enable in each of you some methods for the research and design phases of a project that allow for community-centered approaches to thrive. So we've talked about this idea of having the overview of the street, of looking, of counting, of drawing, of listening, of co-mapping, and going back and forth between all of those again and again, and using all of this as the basis to co-design. So these methods actually borrow from the field of social sciences, and we would probably group them under the term ethnography or collaborative ethnography. And so what many researchers and practitioners are starting to say is that we might call this, in the field of the built environment, collaborative architectural ethnography. And so some of these methods fall under that umbrella. So the first of those methods, the looking part. This, in the social sciences, is called participant observation. Now, this is not to say that you're observing participants. It's actually that you, as a designer and a researcher and a practitioner, are a participant and an observer in this course of streets and the life in the streets. And so what we want to think is that you're immersing yourself in the local context of street life in a particular community, in Sydney and in Phnom Penh. And you want to think, what stories is the street and the life in it telling you? You're not coming with preconceived ideas. You're coming with open eyes and open senses and open ears to see what comes to you and to think, well, why are these stories important to tell, important to share, important to document, important to analyze? So if we just recap, street life through the lens of participant observation means thinking about not just the buildings and the roads, thinking about the layers of life on top of that, the modifications that people are making, the spatial modifications, the users, humans and more than human life, and the activities, right? So if you think about those the modifications or the objects, the people, the plants, the animals that are using them, the intersection of that are the activities, the sort of social impacts. What are you seeing? Where are you seeing it? Who is involved? When is it occurring? How is it occurring? Why is it occurring? And so what? What principles about really great lived streets, community-led practices, what can we learn from all of this study? Are we learning how to create open-ended spaces that can be used by diverse people at diverse times for diverse purposes? Co-generated spaces that can be appropriated by people, spaces of visibility for social struggles, spaces where people can interact, encounter, spaces where we can care and regenerate and rejuvenate, spaces where we belong, where we feel connected. So if we stay on this track of participant observation, what ethnographers use in the social sciences is they listen, usually take notes, and sometimes record audio and then analyze that audio to find themes that are coming up and key ideas. As designers, we use drawing as a tool to accompany some of those techniques. And we use drawing, not just to create visual images that record what we've seen. We use drawing to actually think through and analyze the patterns of street life that we're observing, and then to share what we are observing back with the community to say, did we interpret this correctly? Are we seeing this correctly? Are we hearing you correctly? And then manipulating our drawing, updating it again. And what we try to do is not draw everything we see. This is not about creating beautiful depictions of the whole kind of map or network of street life. We're actually taking a focused view. And this is where looking is very important. We need to look and listen to what the street is telling us and what the users are telling us. And then focus to begin our drawing through a particular lens. So if we see the examples here, this is a train station. This is drawn by Richard Briggs. This is a train station drawing everything that's visible there. This is the same train station focusing just on activities and users in that station. So we're mapping the rhythms of activities and users through a drawing, and through a series of drawings is what this will be. So you need to think, what is the focus? What is that pattern of street life that I'm looking at? And how do I best communicate that and interpret that and analyze that through a focused drawing? And there are some tricks, some technical tricks we can use here. So as you saw in the last drawings, we can use colour. We also don't have to draw everything. So you might choose to omit certain parts of the visual scene that you can see so that we're only focusing on the particular theme that you are studying. Let's go back to that slide. Oh no, it's not going to let me go back. But you can see in the previous slide that the whole train station was not used, and that colour was used to focus on the users and the activities. And what we'll do here is actually scan in our drawings in this course and use colour and a legend to highlight your thematic focus. So we can see here the blue colour has been used to highlight the temporary objects and user modifications that play out across the day in Phnom Penh. And all of these drawings, so using participant observation to look and to draw within your theme of focus, becomes one component, the drawing card of your Assessment 1 street observations. If we take a look at participant observation as well, the other thing that we do, and drawing from social science approaches, is to count. So we're drawing to analyse and to record and to capture a particular type of street life pattern we're focusing on. We're also using counting to find street life patterns and to communicate them. So counting is a really helpful way to track and to map. And you can see in this example here, we've got a plan view and a legend used to track what people are doing in this particular street corner. So we've got a circle for walking, a circle with a cross for standing, a cross for sitting, bikes, strollers, running and jogging. And then we can see some of the components of the day. So the temperature, how long the observation was, and then the date. So this is the kind of drawing that you'll start to create in your sketchbook. And this is what counting can start to look like. So we're kind of tallying, we're connecting some coded symbols to our drawings, and then we will use that to create an infographic. And this is what becomes part of your assessment. So an infographic is another tool that we can use as designers and as architectural ethnographers to tell the story of a street life pattern. And so infographics are a helpful tool to compare elements. So we see here, threshold activity is the focus here of Ali's street life study. And she's looking at types of threshold activity. So what do people do in thresholds, in interior urban thresholds? They either enter, they stop to look, they walk past, or they stop to engage with one another. She then compares that, or kind of analyses that, through the lens of the quantity of activity. So you can see here 3 different colours for 3 different sites, the number of people who entered, the number of people who stopped to look, the number of people who walked past, and the number of people who stopped to engage. And what we want is an immediacy of message. So I immediately see, okay, what is it about this threshold that means that very few people are looking, but a lot of people are simply walking past? And part of that might be that it's a retail store and people simply don't need to shop. But if we think about thresholds, and even economic thresholds, so places where you shop, as having a knock-on effect. So they can also become a place where you don't shop, but where you want to spend time, where you say, oh, let's meet at that shop there. Let's sit down on that ledge there and have a little chat. It can be something that improves your experience of walking down the street because it stimulates your senses, or it gives you something to look at, or it's something for children to look at and to be stimulated by and to play on. So let's think about thresholds and facades as having a function here beyond that of selling goods, beyond that of capitalism and commerce. So we start to get some of that information through the infographic in combination with some of the text and the drawings. And you'll see that the infographics here come into your data card. And the conclusion I was talking about comes in here as well. So the next phase of our street observations is the semi-structured interview and community mapping. And this might be something that many of you have never done. And so it's another skill alongside participant observation that we'd like to teach you all as a way to enable community-centered practice. So again, this goes back to enabling agency in the community and valuing lived experience. The problem with just observing is that often we're not from the community that we're working with. And so we're making assumptions about and interpretations about what we see. So it's very important to cross-check those and even lead those by conversations with community members who are on the ground in the neighbourhood that we're working with. And so when we say a semi-structured interview, we're not there to ask a very rigid set of questions which are formulated from a hypotheses that we've made. We're actually there to facilitate and to have a broad theme and a broad set of questions that allow communities to actually take the conversations in different ways and to lead what that conversation will be and what is actually mapped or visually recorded on the mapping document that you'll have as part of the interview. So we call that looser approach, not a structured interview, a semi-structured interview. And again, that borrows from social sciences. So what we do as designers is we change this process a little bit. And so a little bit like participant observation, we use drawings and infographics to kind of bring our skills as designers in intersection with those of social sciences. Is in the community interview and mapping component, we again bring those design skills to say, well, could we use visual aids to help improve the community facilitation process and the community interaction process? And so we use the map, and in this course we'll use a street cart to break the ice, and almost like a social magnet for community members. The street cart you'll see and the map can help diffuse what can be quite focused and intense conversations when researchers come out to communities and to community members that they often don't know. And so if we think about these as tools to make people feel comfortable, to build trust, and to break ice, then that can be a really helpful mechanism for facilitating these sorts of processes. If we think about the map component, we have the cart and we'll have a map fixed onto the top of it. The cart almost breaks the ice, and the map does this even more. And the map allows this tool whereby our community members can actually visually record their experiences, their ideas, their perceptions, their knowledge of their neighbourhood. So verbal discussion can sometimes be misinterpreted, right? So what we're trying to do is have verbal discussion plus visual mapping to really enable us to better understand community insights and to enable more agency to community voice. So we're actually recording and getting them to record, to step into the role of community researcher to lead what works, discussions about what works, what doesn't work, and what should happen in their communities. If we think about maps, often maps are portrayed as sort of technical devices to record factual information about a place. But actually, that's not what they do. Maps have for very long periods of time, thinking about colonisation, being used to exert power and control over communities who are often in positions of powerlessness. And so we can shift the relationships of power using maps that are led by community members, with designers as the facilitators, as the prompters. Okay? This is a great diagram here. I don't know if I can zoom in on it. No, I can't. But it looks at alternative purposes for maps. And there are all sorts of groups around the world who are doing very interesting work here. So maps can be used for social action. If we have a look at the top, this one here, for social action, for activism, think across the last 5 years when protests have been taking place. Social media, maps, protests coming on here, come here at this time. Maps have been used to report events. That's the second one here. So my own work in Phnom Penh was connected to mapping as a way to document communities that were being evicted from Phnom Penh, informal settlements that were, without people knowing, often large numbers of communities that were being moved out of the city, forcibly often. Maps can be used to share information. Right? So what's happening and where? This is another way of occupying space. Let's show this to council. People are using this space in an unexpected way. Maps can document that, and so they can be like an advocacy tool, particularly when they're used in dialogue with decision makers or those in power. So if we think about destabilizing or equalizing those power relationships so that community, councils, homeowners, business owners can start to interact on a level playing field, a map can be a really powerful tool for that. And then building collective value. So if you think about communities, neighbourhoods, not-for-profit organisations mapping around a whole city or a state or a country or the world, we can start to see patterns and we can start to bring people together and enact change through collective mapping. So this course is starting to tap into some of these processes of mapping and some of the knock-on effects of mapping that we see here. What's a tricky thing in this course is that we don't have a lot of time. So in an ideal world, we are immersing in community, we are listening, we're observing, we're mapping, and then we're coming back again. We're using the map to direct what we observe. And then we feed our observations and our discussions back again to community members. And we follow this loop, this feedback loop, it's often called, again and again, until we come to a consensus about what the next steps are, what the plan of action is. And so we're trying to emulate that in this course in a shorter period of time. And this all comes out in your assessment in the community mapping page. So you'll just submit exactly what has come from the community interviews and mapping that you've done. All of this is supported, not led, but supported by desktop study. So you'll see we have videos and readings, some of which are written by community voices, or at the very least, incorporate and share community voices so that you start to bring that community-centered approach into your desktop study. In this course, we also have readings that talk to methods for community-centered approaches. And so the desktop study will help you to frame and further analyse and lead what you're seeing and what you're hearing. And that comes through again here in your data card in the context ecosystem. So you'll be talking about what you've read and what you've heard that actually drives what you're seeing. So what are the cultural factors that might be behind the street life patterns that you're seeing? What are the social factors? What are the economic factors? What are the political factors that you might not observe? You might hear from community members, but these can be sort of led by things that you read, by researchers that have worked in this space over long periods of time, often. And so what we're trying to get you to do is to bring all of these diverse research sources together and to say, I saw and I heard and I read about this pattern of street life. The impact on the community and on social life is this. It has this effect. It promotes this. The possible reasons behind this pattern are this, this, and this. You know, legally, you can only use the sidewalk for this. Economically, people need to sell these things, but the social impact of that is this. And the principles that I can learn from this example for facilitating and designing great lived streets are this. That's sort of the summary. That's the conclusion part of your assessment. And so we'll see that all of those topics that we've just talked through come together through the three facets of your assessment. The drawings led by observation, the desktop investigation, and then the community mapping. And all of these intersect with one another. We'll talk more very soon in class. Thanks, everyone.